Now, Western education produces dictators.
I'm W. Nathan Livingston.
And I'm Walker Edwards.
Okay, so basically our project is about how dictators oftentimes study in the West and how Western education and culture actually influences them to become more power hungry and how it helps them stay on top.
Yeah, how it's almost like the key component that is the same thing in almost every single dictator, and not only dictators, but people from Gandhi to Nelson Mandela to the people we're going to discuss.
We have 3 examples.
So, Kim Jong-un.
Kim Jong-un, although there is no official biography on Kim Jong-un, it is widely believed that he went to school in Bern, Switzerland from 1993 to 1998. And he was sort of like a shy, awkward kid while he was there, but he was at the top of his class, and often, it said that he often didn't go out and just studied the entire time. He was also an avid fan of Western culture, particularly basketball, and that's how his whole relationship with Dennis Rodman started. And after he went to school in Bern, he attended a school in Kaunas, Switzerland from 1998 to 2001, like the equivalent of grad school for him.
Next is Fidel Castro. Now, Fidel Castro wasn't directly educated in a Western state like Kim Jong-un was, but he was educated in the University of Havana, which was obviously affiliated with the government, and the curriculum would be largely controlled by the government. And the government at that time was ruled by Fulgencio Batista, who was a U.S.-placed dictator in Cuba that basically was there to sort of secure the business interests of the U.S. It was sort of a continuation of what we studied in terms of colonial control over sugar production and the other cash crops in Cuba. And basically Batista was a way to keep that under U.S. control. And basically Fidel Castro arose as a product of that. And he was educated there, and he sort of got to the University of Havana and then began to see sort of the discrepancy, because in Havana, at that time, Havana was sort of like a place for the U.S. to go, like sort of a crazy getaway place for the elite. So he saw the extreme of American decadence. All the elites of America would go to Havana, get prostitutes, exploit the people in all sorts of ways. And so Havana was just like this real, like a city of sin that sort of the North America went to and exploited the Cuban natives.
And our last example is Pol Pot, the Cambodian leader. He presided over the massive genocide that occurred in the late 70s. He studied primary and secondary school at École Miche, a French Catholic school in Phnom Penh, the capital. And after studying there, he even got a technical scholarship to go study radio engineering in Paris. So not only did he receive French education in his home country of Cambodia, but he got a scholarship to study in Paris. And there he sort of saw, this is what sort of inspired all of our leaders, by seeing how the French treated his native people in Cambodia sort of poorly, not giving them anything and treating them like second-class citizens, and then going to Paris and seeing all the luxury and decadence, and at the same time receiving the same education that the French people received just by themselves. This sort of spurs on the feelings of anger, like he deserves more, and combine that with the education he's receiving from the French is how you get a dictator.
So basically, to sum up just really quick, what these men all have in common is all 3 of these men were educated by a Western education system. These men were all communist or socialist. They all sort of went to Marxist ideology. They all became authoritarian dictators, some worse than others, but all of them did sort of rule for a very long time. There were no elections. They executed certain people that they didn't agree with. It certainly was far away from any kind of Western democracy. They all united the peasantry. That was sort of their main building block of the revolution, was trying to make life better for the lowest of the low, even though they themselves all came from middle to upper class. It ranged. I mean, obviously Kim Jong-un was actually born into the elites, but Pol Pot, Fidel Castro were basically born into semi-wealthy landowning families. They weren't part of the elites, because if they were part of the elites, why would they want to overthrow the elite class? But they were rich enough to get an education, to be exposed to Western ideas, but they were poor enough to sort of understand how terrible life was for peasants in their home countries. Next slide.
I think that's the last slide. But
No. Now, basically, the core of our TED Talk is why. Why did this happen? And basically, the core of our thesis is that because of these men's unique position in society, and because they were exposed to Western education, they got sort of to see the discrepancy between the lowest and the highest. Fidel Castro, for example. He was born into a decently wealthy landowning family, but he lived in an area where, outside of his sort of family's compound, he saw tons of peasants, he saw people living on subsistence farming, and then, because he was rich enough to get to a Western education center, Havana, he then saw Western decadence, he saw the extremes of capitalism, he saw the worst of the worst. And that's sort of the core of all these men, is their position in society is such that they can sort of navigate and at least sort of see all sorts of classes of life. And this is true of pretty much all revolutionaries from Fidel Castro to the Buddhas, that they're exposed to all levels of life and they can sort of see it. And this vision of discrepancy is what really propels them to sort of create a revolution. Now, what draws them to being a dictator is, in fact, because they see the extremes of capitalism, they need to turn to something else. They see the worst of the worst. They see, Fidel Castro sees peasants working for nothing, and then whites in Havana getting prostitutes, eating more food than they can possibly even finish. And this sort of directs them towards Marxism, and because of their Western education, they have access to the intellectual concepts. They're not peasants, they can understand things.
And combining that with the Western education at the time, which put a huge emphasis on class, rank, and test scores at that time in getting into the university, compared to Eastern education, where it was more about life skills in terms of farming and raising a family. This breeds competition internally, and by getting that sort of competition and doing whatever it takes to get to the top, combined with the anger they have from seeing the massive difference in their home country and where they went to study, it put them in a position where they can not only get to the top successfully, but then once they were on top, suppress everyone around them and make sure that nobody else could get their position.
Yeah, this exposure and resentment for the West sort of bred the hypocrisy you see in these dictators, is that they hold themselves to a completely different standard. For example, Kim Jong-un, though they talk about how important it is, to be about North Korea, to sort of only consume North Korean goods, to not have contact with other countries, the Un family, or the Kim Jong-il and Un's family, they go to other countries, they visit other countries, they have retreats in Switzerland, they have cabins, they have all these things that they can do. And it's because they sort of are exposed to a Western sense of pleasure and hedonism, while at the same time they have this hatred of capitalism and this passion for Marxism that they think they have the answer. They think they've been exposed to more and that they have a sort of a right to control the citizens of their country, while at the same time occupy a Western decadent rung at the very top.
To sum it up, essentially, all these factors, the discrepancy in home country and where they went to study, being that sort of middle class in between rich and poor, and the competition bred from Western education with class, rank, and importance on test scores at that time, really created the perfect storm to make a dictator.
Thank you.